On today's Big Me Kickoff, we will talk Notre Dame, the game that everybody's talking about, and so much more. So without further delay, let's get right to it. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. It is Noon's Big Me Kickoff here on Buckeye Huddle. Want to just sit there and say right off the bat, be sure to join BuckeyeHuddle.com. You can get all the information down below in the description. Team coverage, recruiting coverage, fastest growing community in Buckeye Nation, all here on Buckeye Huddle. And also be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell. Don't miss a single thing here on this channel, including great shows like Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning, the Buckeye Weekly Podcast, and so much more. But without further delay, let's get to the reason you're here to talk about the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And with that, I'm bringing in Ryan Roberts of IrishBreakdown.com, friend of the show. And, first of all, Ryan, how are you doing, man?
I'm good, Kevin. I'm good. I appreciate you for having me on, man. How's everything on your end?
Doing great. Brand new site, so we're really excited. Just getting ready. Shot some videos in Ohio Stadium on Tuesday, so it really feels like it is time. What's the pulse around Notre Dame Nation? What are Notre Dame fans saying? I mean, obviously, as of yesterday, it was like a 17.5-point line, moving from 14. I mean, what are people thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like right now there's been a lot of anxiousness, right? I mean, as soon as Marcus Freeman takes over, it's kind of the quick turnaround to the bowl game, and then he gets immediately into the recruiting process that was already taking place. And, there's been a lot of excitement around the program, a lot of changes, obviously, but I really think it's anxiousness. And then I think there's another side of the fan base where they're trying to get themselves psyched up with some poster board material, right? The 17.5 points and disrespect, and going into the shoe is going to be a big test for Notre Dame, obviously, and it's been a long time since Notre Dame has come out of one of these big games with a victory and just a relatively good outcome just in general, right? Like, it's been some very lopsided defeats in these types of games for Notre Dame in recent memory. So I think that anxiousness and just trying to get yourself ready to go, because it feels like this was a really long offseason because there's just so much excitement around Notre Dame, but we just haven't played football for a long time now.
And I'm going to ask you kind of a difficult question, I think, to answer, because, we get only so much access to teams. You don't get to see certain things, but how is this team different under the Marcus Freeman regime than maybe it was under Brian Kelly? I mean, are there significant changes that have appeared, or, is it too soon to tell because they've not played a down of football? So, it's really, a very subjective type of question.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit, Kev, but I'll say this. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the eye in the sky doesn't lie, right? So I need to see what happens on game day and what type of in-game coach Marcus Freeman can be. But I mean, the immediate returns that you've seen as far as changes in the program is, I mean, I got to see a live practice during the spring period. I know that we've covered a few of them. We've been in every one that's media has been available for. And the thing that people have kind of reiterated that have been on the beat a lot longer than I have been is that there's a much more competitive environment. It was a little more laxed in practice format for Brian Kelly, and it was just kind of quiet and not much juice. And I do think that Coach Freeman has brought just kind of this competitive environment that people are working very hard, obviously, behind the scenes, but they are not shy with the fact that every spot's open and let's get after it, right? Let's not back down from the competition that's in front of us. So I think from a practice perspective, there's been a big change with how they just kind of go about it from an everyday perspective. And then the easiest change for people to see right now is on the recruiting side of things, which obviously is where a lot of my work is. He's kind of changed the scope of what types of players can fit at Notre Dame. I feel like for a long time, and this was even before Coach Kelly to a degree, it was like you were trying to find the proper Notre Dame fits, and you weren't kind of widening the scope and figuring out but there are other players that can fit here because we have the supports in place that we can help them and guide them to being a positive part of the program. So I think it's just kind of a full evaluation process right now, but I just think ultimately there's a competitive spirit that's around this program that wasn't always there in the previous regime.
Let's get into some personnel here. And Tyler Buchner,
yep.
Is he a runner who throws, or is that a gross oversimplification? Because I think people go back and they look at the stats. And, they see he rushed for 300 some yards last year and everything, but
Yep.
he attempted like 35 passes.
Mhm.
But when you come in a spot role, I mean, you sometimes have, very limited play calls for yourself. So is that, just a gross oversimplification to say, he is a runner who throws more so than he is a true dual threat type of quarterback?
I think it is. I mean, last year I don't think was very indicative of the type of dual threat player that he truly is, because last year, I mean, you had Jack Cohn, who was the starter for the team. So Tyler Buchner was used on the field last year as a simplified gadgety weapon, right? Like, he's a very good athlete. I mean, he's probably a high 4.5, low 4.6 type of athlete at playing the quarterback position. So Notre Dame needed to get him on the field in some capacity, and that was the way that they chose was the best way to get his skill set on the field. But I mean, if you go back to just his high school stuff, which he missed his senior year because of the COVID shutdown in California. But I mean, his junior year, he threw for like 4,500 yards and 50 something touchdowns. So like, he's always been a pocket quarterback that can also do the zone read game, can also, break a tackle and, become a runner outside of structure. But he is definitely a passer first, but he has that dynamic ability, which is why a lot of Notre Dame fans are excited about it, Kevin, is the fact that, like, we haven't had a quarterback at the helm that you would quantify as a true dual threat quarterback in a while now, right? So the talent is all there. He's definitely a pocket quarterback, in my opinion. It's just about he's played one full season of starting experience in the last 4 years, because he missed his sophomore year with an injury the whole year. Junior year, he plays fantastic. Then senior year, COVID shutdown. And then last year, he's in a simplified role. So he hasn't started a game in a few years, which is the tough part as far as making the transition. But he's definitely a kid that's capable from a talent level to do both parts. There's no doubt about that.
Sticking with the offensive side of the ball, I mean, obviously Notre Dame, big loss in the receiving core, but in the running game, no Kyron Williams at this point. So where do you think this team looks in terms of offense? I mean, is this going to be more of a running team, more of a throwing team? I know everybody wants to be that balanced team, and there's
Sure.
such a big misconception of balance. Everybody's like, well, does that mean 30 pass attempts and 30 rushes, or does that mean 250 and 250? I mean,
Yep.
none of those necessarily fit what balance is. But what do you think the DNA of this offense is going to end up being?
I think the priority is big time to improve the running game. Last year, it wasn't great. You had an NFL running back in Kyron Williams, but you had an offensive line that just was not good last year, for being completely honest. The things that get you excited about this team is that you have Harry Hiestand coming back as the offensive line coach, who, I mean, when you think of the success that Notre Dame had on the offensive line when they could claim offensive line U, that was Harry Hiestand, from the Zach Martins to the Quentin Nelsons to the Ronnie Stanleys. Like, that was kind of the developer of that talent. So having him back is a big thing for Notre Dame. And I mean, rightfully so, they feel like the offensive line is going to take a huge step forward. And I do too. And they have a stable of 3 running backs that are going to play that are very talented players, unproven for the most part, but Chris Tyree is a legit 4.3 type of athlete at the running back position. You have Audric Estime, who's a 230-pound hammer. And then you got Logan Diggs, who 210, 215-pound, has both, I don't want to say best of both worlds, but he's kind of a nice little mixture. So you have a really nice 3-headed running back tandem in theory. If the offensive line's improved, I think they're really going to get back to running the football a ton, because Tyler Buchner, again, to our initial point, he's a dynamic dual threat quarterback. He's going to be able to do stuff in the quarterback run game, the read game, all that good stuff. And the biggest question mark that I have on the offensive side of the ball right now is the wide receiver depth right now. The worst thing that came from the recruiting of the previous regime is that Notre Dame came into this season with just a lack of depth at the position. I mean, they had 7 scholarship receivers going into spring ball. Avery Davis is out now with an injury. So they have 6 scholarship receivers right now, which is a very low number, obviously. And a lot of them are unproven, talented, surely. And I think that they can make plays for their specific roles. But I think right now the emphasis has to be on establishing a run game, getting Tyler Buchner's, the dual threat aspects of them, and picking your spots and creating explosive plays in the passing game, because there's just not a lot of depth in the wide receiver group right now.
Let's flip over to defense, and where's kind of the heart of this defense? There are guys mentioned on all 3 levels. I mean, honestly, I mean, we can start in linebacker with JD Bertrand. I mean, you got a lot of guys there, but where do you see this defense really excelling? In terms of maybe not so much of just, well, this guy is great and that guy is great, but where's the heart of the defense?
I think it's the defensive line pretty clearly, in my opinion. I think there's questions both on the second and third levels at particular spots, but defensive line wise, I mean, you have Isaiah Foskey coming back at defensive end, who was a preseason All-American, had double-digit sacks last year, really talented player, 6'5", 260, explosive, long, all those good things. But they also have Jason Adamalola inside, who I believe is one of the more underrated defensive tackles in college football. I mean, he had 50-plus tackles last year, 8.5 tackles for loss. The tackle for loss and sack numbers, I think, are going to improve this year because he made a lot of plays last year, created a lot of penetration, but he didn't always finish plays last year, right? So, I think that's the emphasis for him is let's finish more. And then you have a good solid rotation at the other defensive tackle spot with Howard Cross and Jacob Lacey. I think that spot will be just fine. And then you have a potential breakout star at the strong side defensive end and Riley Mills, a guy that was dominant in the spring and continued that momentum into the fall and was on the Feldman's freak list. And I mean, he's 6'5", 293 pounds, kind of playing that strong side defensive end. So Notre Dame's got some guys up front that I think will present challenges to any team. And I think that they're the cleanest as far as I don't think there's really a hole in that front four at all. You can point to a potential hole in the secondary. You can point to a question mark on the second level. There's no doubt, but the defensive line, I think, is one of the better ones in the college football this year.
So you say, maybe that there's a spot here and a spot there in the back seven.
Yep.
How would you try to attack the Notre Dame defense if you were opposing offensive coordinator and it's like, okay, well, pick your poison. This is what we're going to try to do. What is it that you would try to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty simple, especially in the passing game and against the secondary. Notre Dame has a really good corner in Cam Hart playing to the field. They have Brandon Joseph transferring over from Northwestern, who's a really talented player. The guy that got challenged a lot last year and needs to improve is Clarence Lewis, who's going to be playing into the boundary. He's number 6. He had a really rough bowl game, and he had some just rough moments last year in general as a sophomore. I mean, Notre Dame's hoping obviously that he takes a big step forward, which is obviously possible, but he is the guy that I think is going to get challenged a lot against Ohio State and just in general, because he is the guy where I'm not going to attack Cam Hart. I'm not going to attack Brandon Joseph. I'm going to go after number 6, who the last time we saw him didn't play a very good football game. So I think getting some of your talented receivers, if you're Ohio State, whether it's Marvin Harrison Jr., or Jackson Smith and Jigba, or Emeka Ibuka, whoever it is, getting them into the boundary and potential one-on-one situations at times against Clarence Lewis, I think that's where you can take advantage of this team potentially. That's kind of the weak spot in the secondary. Second level has some concerns for me, Kevin, just mostly because you mentioned J.D. Bertrand, who had a pretty good season last year, 100-plus tackles. They have a really talented linebacker, Maris Loifau, coming back from injury, playing the will. And I expect him to potentially be the best linebacker on the team this year, but it's a question mark right now, right? We haven't seen it because he was injured all of last year. Last time we saw him, he was playing in 2020, and I mean, he was a part-time player and had 20-something tackles. The talent is extraordinary, but it's a question mark right now. But I mean, to answer your question, I think if Ohio State can create some mismatches into the boundary against Clarence Lewis, if Notre Dame decides that they're not going to switch a ton and they're going to play field boundary, that's where I think that they can have a lot of success early on in this game until, we'll see if what type of adjustments Notre Dame can make in that situation.
Ohio State obviously had a very, prolific offense last season, put up a ton of points. I think a lot of Ohio State fans think that this, Ohio State's going to put up a lot of points in this game. It's a matter of can Notre Dame keep up with them. If this game turns into a shootout, can Notre Dame survive that? Or I mean, what's kind of the magic number of where Notre Dame needs to try and keep Ohio State to in order to feel like it can have a chance to outscore the Buckeyes?
Yeah, I think that when you're talking about Notre Dame's offense against the Ohio State defense, I think Notre Dame has the opportunity to score a good amount of points. I think that Ohio State is breaking in, obviously. Not a great year last year on the defensive side of the ball, bringing Jim Knowles in, obviously. And Jim Knowles, if you look just kind of his track record, although he has a lot more talent now than he had at Duke and Oklahoma State, the couple previous stops before this as defensive coordinator, the first year is usually a little bit of a transitional period because Jim Knowles' defense is very sophisticated, right? There's a lot of layers to it, the 4-2-5, the 3-3-5 adjustments and 2 high, 3 safety looks. There's a lot of different things that they like to do. I'm interested to see what Jim Knowles does if he keeps it a little more simplified early on in the season, because obviously Ohio State has a lot of talent on the defensive side of the football. But I think just judging basically what we saw last year, I think Notre Dame is going to be able to score a little bit on Ohio State. I think the number is, if you keep Ohio State 31 points or lower, Notre Dame has a chance to score with them. If it gets into the 35 plus 40 point range, then I don't think that's the game that Notre Dame can win. Like, that's just not their style. They're going to score some points this year. They're going to be explosive, in my opinion, but I would not just want to go into a shootout against Ohio State. Like you said, I mean, they scored 46 points per game last year, and I think they could be even better because the offensive line, I think, is going to take its dramatic step forward with Justin Fry, and I think they're going to be a more balanced offense with the degree of just using Travion Henderson a little bit more to just kind of close teams out, right? So I think that they don't want to get into a 40-point affair with Ohio State. I think that would be very unwise, but if you can keep it to 32, 31 or less, I think that Notre Dame has a chance in that regard.
We'll get to your prediction here in a second, but I want to throw another, topic that is, front and center for people, and that's Big Ten expansion and Notre Dame being mentioned there. And I know that, Jack Swarbrick is, wait and see. And, we're going to sit there and have, this Zoom call and talk to some people and get their opinions. From this side of things, it seems that they're, certainly like the old school Notre Dame fans, they have no interest whatsoever in conference affiliation. What is your position? What are you seeing in terms of that? I mean, because, the Big Ten goes out, picks up USC and UCLA, certainly has not said that they're done by any stretch of the imagination. The TV contract has elevators built in that, if they get Notre Dame and some others, I mean, we could see it go from 7 billion to 10 billion. I mean, just, outrageous numbers being thrown out there, but, Notre Dame has to come to the dance party.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, Kevin. I honestly am I would like Notre Dame to stay independent as long as possible, if I'm being completely honest. I think that it might be difficult for them because how it looks and how everyone keeps talking about is like if it's eventually a Big Ten versus SEC super conference battle, right? Like, you're going to be on the outside looking in. Like, that's going to be a situation where you might not be able to remain independent. So your hand might be forced eventually in that regard. For now, though, I just kind of want to see how it plays out a little bit. I think that's where everyone thinks it's going, but there is a lot of speculation that's getting thrown out there, and I don't have a complete tangible understanding of what the college football landscape is ultimately going to look at. And I don't think that Notre Dame needs to jump the gun, if I'm being honest. Like, Notre Dame has their brand, obviously, and every conference would want Notre Dame to be a part of it, right? Because it would strengthen their brand and it would make them more money, obviously, long term. So I think waiting it out right now and just kind of completely understanding the landscape is probably the best way to go at Notre Dame, because ultimately, even if you do have to join a conference, you're going to make yourself more valuable, because there's going to be conferences that I think are going to kind of get into a little bit of a bidding war for Notre Dame at some point. So I think ultimately it may come to a conclusion where Notre Dame will be forced almost to join a conference eventually. But I'm very much in the standpoint of like, let's let it play out and let's see what happens, because I don't think jumping the gun is going to be your greatest opportunity to make money if that's your long-term outlook, right? Like, I think that Notre Dame have the standing points, and they have everything in their favor right now as far as playing the waiting game. I don't think they have to jump the gun right now as far as getting out of their independence.
A lot of thoughts on that. We'll probably have you back on the show here down the line and do something, go more in depth there, because I don't want to get too far away. This is about Ohio State, Notre Dame, joined by Ryan Roberts of IrishBreakdown.com. And now we're to the final question. How does this game play out in your opinion, and any prediction?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a little bit of a prediction on Friday, but I guess I'll give like a quick glimpse. I'm always going to pick Notre Dame. I mean, you can call it the homerism, or I do have a fandom to Notre Dame. Like, I've been a Notre Dame fan my entire life, so I'm not going to pick against them. So I'm going to say in the ideal scenario for Notre Dame, I mentioned like 31 or less types points would have to be the number. I'm going to say 34-31, Notre Dame goes into the shoe and takes the victory. It's going to be a tough one. There's no doubt. I think it's going to be a competitive football game. That's why I keep fighting back against the 17.5, because that is just a massive, obviously, line. I have no problem with Ohio State being favored and being favored heavily, but I think that 17.5 is a little too high, because I think that both teams are going to be good football teams ultimately. So I think it's going to be a competitive football game, but I'll take Notre Dame 34-31 in a shootout in the shoe.
Well, there you have it. Ryan Roberts taking Notre Dame. You'll get my prediction here, I guess, probably on Friday. It's already started to get out there, doing a lot of appearances this week. Spoiler alert, I'm taking Ohio State, but we'll by how many, you'll have to kind of wait and see. But Ryan, any final thoughts? Where can people find you on social media and find your work?
Yeah. So you can find me at Rise and Drafts. Like Kevin said, it's irishbreakdown.com. If any Ohio State fans out there are just kind of interested in how Notre Dame plans to attack this game and a little bit of just kind of the full landscape of the game, we've been breaking it down on YouTube. We just broke down Jim Knowles' defense yesterday, broke down a little bit of some of Ohio State's favorite passing concepts. So we were just kind of diving into both sides of the coin to lead up to kickoff. But, just genuinely excited. And Kevin, as always, I appreciate you for having me on again.
Absolutely. So there you got it. So, we're just a couple days away from the game, hoping that everybody gets out there, has a chance to go see the game or watch it on TV with their favorite beverage. But until next time, this is the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, and have a wonderful day.